we're going to evaluate functions using graphs. So you'll notice in this first particular graph, I am being asked to find the value for f of 4. So remember, the f just refers to the name of the function, and the value in parentheses is telling you what the x value is for this particular function. And so I'm going to find where my x value is 4. So my x-axis 1, 2, 3, 4. So here's that x value. And I'm actually looking for the point on the graph, which is right up here. So when they're asking me what is the f of 4, that's just a fancy way of saying what is the y value when x is 4. So they're saying what is the y value when your x is 4. So looking at this particular graph, if I look over here at the y value, that is a y value of 4. Okay, now let's just make up another one just to do something different. Let's say I asked you to find the value for the f of 1. So now you're looking at the graph to find an x value of 1. So my x value of 1 would actually be this point right here. And what I notice about that point, it's on the x-axis, that would indicate that the y value at that point is 0. All right, so let's do one more. Let's say I asked you to find the f of negative 2. So again, you're looking at the graph for function f, the x value of negative 2. So when I come to my graph, here's my x of negative 2, but I've got to look on the actual graph for the point. And when I look at that actual point, the y value of that point, when I trace it over to the y-axis, has a y value of negative 4. Okay, so then the other thing they could ask us to do, they could give us a graph and they could ask us all these different things. So first they've said, what is the function's domain? So remember, with domain, we're talking x's. And when we look at the graph for domain, we've got to look from left to right. So domain always goes from left to right. So as I come in here from the left, notice there is the first point where the x's start. And if I follow that down to my x-axis, that is an x value of negative 3. Notice that there is an open point on the graph at negative 3. Because it's open, what that means is the graph is not touching at negative 3. And the way we indicate that it does not touch is we put a parentheses. Now, as I move to the right, so my eyes are going this way, the last x value that I'm touching is down here. And that is an x value of 0. Notice that is a solid point on the graph. So that means it includes that point, and the way we indicate it includes a point is we use a square bracket. On part B, when they're asking me about the actual range of a graph, with range we're talking y values, and so your eyes have to go bottom to top. Range goes bottom to top. So as I'm coming from the bottom, notice the first y value that I hit is at that point there. That has a y value of negative 1. It's a solid point because that includes the point I have to open with a square bracket. Now as my eyes continue to go up on the graph, the last place that it actually touches when I go up on the graph is right here. And if I follow that to the y-axis, that is a y value of 8. And I said touches, but it goes to. Because it's an open circle, it's not actually touching, so we have to put parentheses there. All right, part C is asking me about X-intercepts on the graph. X-intercepts are going to be where a graph crosses or touches the x-axis. So you're looking for where a graph crosses or touches your x-axis. So as I look at this particular graph that they have given me, I'll notice that the graph is crossing the x-axis right there. And so that is an actual x value of -1. Now, you have to pay attention to how they want you to write it. If they just say, where is the x-intercept, then you can just say -1. If they want it written as an ordered pair, keep in mind that the y value at that point would be 0. So pay attention to how they want you to write it, and they'll tell you in the instructions. And then if they're asking me about a y-intercept, so part D, when they ask you about a y-intercept, then you're talking about where a graph crosses or touches the y-axis. So as I look at this particular graph, the point where my graph is actually touching the y-axis is right here. And so notice that y value is at -1 as well. And so if they want it as an ordered pair, your x is always 0 when you're talking about a y-intercept. And so the coordinates of that point would be 0, -1. So the y-intercept is at 0, -1. And then finally, last but not least, they asked me to evaluate this particular function f when my x value is -2. So when I look at my x-axis, here's your x of -2, but you've got to follow it up to see where that point is on the graph. And so there's that actual point on the graph. So if you look at what y value that is, that's a y value of +2 as well.